First tonight to Israel, where in the last 24 hours, thousands of demonstrators have packed into Tel Aviv's Habima Square, calling on the Israeli government to agree a deal to end the war in Gaza and bring all the hostages still held by Hamas home. Footage shows huge crowds, with some people holding signs aloft to show their objection to the ongoing conflict. Following the main rally, some protesters blocked nearby streets and were forcibly dispersed by police, who also detained some of the protesters. Now, to other related developments, Israel has said it will allow Jordan and the United Arab Emirates to resume airdropping humanitarian supplies to Gaza shortly. Israeli officials said Jordan is set to carry out the first airdrop, possibly as soon as today. Correspondents say one of the reasons this was abandoned before was because it was seen as a very inefficient way of getting aid into Gaza, and also a dangerous way too. 5 people were killed on one occasion when a parachute malfunctioned. Several countries and aid groups say Israel's blockade of the Palestinian territory has led to mass starvation. Meanwhile, Israel and the United States have condemned the announcement by President Emmanuel Macron that France will recognize a Palestinian state in September. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described it as a reckless decision and a slap in the face of the victims of the deadly Hamas attacks on October 2023. France had hinted for months that it would recognize Palestinian statehood. Well, now it joins nearly 150 countries which have previously done so. But it's the first in the G7 group of industrialized nations to take this step. President Macron said a formal announcement would be made at the UN General Assembly in September, and he called for a demilitarized Palestinian state which would fully recognize Israel. He said there was no alternative. The move has been welcomed in the Arab world, notably by Palestinian officials, Hamas, and Saudi Arabia. But the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said a Palestinian state would be a launch pad to annihilate Israel.
I believe in the future of a two-state solution as the basis for a regional security architecture that will allow Israel to live in peace and security with its neighbours. I believe in a need to unite our voices in Paris, London and everywhere else to recognise a state of Palestine and initiate this political dynamic, which is the only one consistent with the prospect of peace.
Look, he's a different kind of a guy. He's okay. He's a team player, pretty much. But here's the good news: what he says doesn't matter. You know, it's not going to change it. Well, he made a statement, Macron. His statement doesn't carry any weight. He's a very good guy. I like him, but that statement doesn't carry weight.
Donald Trump and before him Emmanuel Macron. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman. Great to see you, and thank you very much indeed for coming in. What's your reaction to this announcement by France that it would recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September?
Well, good evening, Charles. Always a pleasure to be here. I'm genuinely puzzled. It's a sad statement. It's a statement that I think is a reward for terrorism. It rewards the Hamas attacks of 7th October 2023. The fact that immediately after the announcement, Hamas praised this decision by Macron says everything you need to know about it. It's also a fairly meaningless because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change any facts on the ground. And more than that, I think we've seen the immediate results of this announcement. The immediate results of this announcement have been that Hamas have now made ridiculous demands in the ceasefire negotiations. We were on the verge of a ceasefire agreement in Gaza. We had been making very significant progress. And now Hamas feel that they've been emboldened by this announcement and by other announcements by other European countries, and have come back with ridiculous positions and extreme positions. And now the entire ceasefire has collapsed.
Now, what's the position the they've come back with?
Well, they've come back on lots of promises that they've been made. We heard this evening President Trump said very clearly Hamas are not interested in a deal. We heard his representative, his envoy, Steve Witkoff, say last night that Hamas are not interested in a deal. Up until now, it's been lots of criticism of lots of people, but it's very, very clear at this point that Hamas are not interested in a deal, that they feel emboldened by statements such of President Macron. And when I asked her about Macron, I don't understand the timing of it. Why would you make an announcement now, as we're in the middle of the ceasefire negotiations, when he said he's not going to make the recognition until September? This is a pre-announcement, which in the timing of it has just made a ceasefire further and further away and is going to condemn the region to more death and more destruction. The hostages are not going to come home in the near future because of that. And so I question his motivations.
Well, it's obviously aimed at making a point, isn't it? Which is that there is considerable, if you like, disquiet around the world about what is going on in Gaza.
Right, but we were on the verge of a ceasefire. We were very, very close. Israel had made significant compromises in those conversations, and that's according, obviously, to the Israelis, but also the Americans and the Qataris and the Egyptians. And we saw that when Hamas came back with their proposal, in their response to our proposal, Qatar and Egypt, this is not Israel, this is not America, Qatar and Egypt said to Hamas, we're not even going to present this proposal. It's not a serious proposal. You cannot expect us to go forward with this. This is not something we can talk about. So when Qatar and Egypt are saying that Hamas are not coming to the table with a serious proposal, that tells you everything you need to know. So unfortunately, we still would like to move forward with a ceasefire. We have 50 hostages, and I remind everybody that there are 50 Israelis and other nationalities, including an African and others, that are being held by Hamas, for over 650 days, and are refusing to release them. And that's the core of this issue.
So basically, for all the symbolic resonance of this French move to recognize a Palestinian state in September, it does nothing basically to ease the plight of Gaza's starving population, does it?
Well, I think it does the exact opposite. I think that it's going to bring more tragedy to the region because we've seen that Hamas have praised this decision and now have hardened their stance. So the irony is that his statement that this is something that's important, that's going to help the region, has actually set the region back further.
Well, there is a symbolic significance, isn't there? The fact that a G7 country has come out to recognize the need for a Palestinian state.
Well, it's a statement, and the only statement is, and I said it's a statement before a recognition. It's a bizarre timing, and as I said, it's caused more damage than anything else, and
right.
It's driven a ceasefire further away.
Well, on the ground in Gaza, the main UN aid agency for Palestinians, UNRWA, says that 1 in 5 children is now malnourished in Gaza, with the situation getting worse every day. How do you react to the fact that those difficulties accessing food are a direct result of the restrictions imposed by Israel?
Well, I would not accept that. The problems in Gaza are a direct result of Hamas. Hamas are the ones who started this war. Hamas are the ones who are continuing this war.
But the way you're prosecuting the war is
there are currently, and I know you're aware of this, and we saw the pictures earlier on TV, there are over 950 truckloads of aid on the Gazan side that have not been collected by the United Nations, that have come in and have been sitting and waiting for the United Nations to come and to distribute, and they haven't done that. And when we announced this and brought the international media and, if you like, shamed the United Nations, all of a sudden, in the last 2 days, 470 truckloads, this week rather, have been now collected from there and are starting to be distributed. So we believe that the mechanism should exist in order to do that. We also have to talk about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that has distributed to 600,000 Gazans food, has distributed millions of food.
Well, the Gazans dispute that. They say that every time they go to the sites of the GHF, they get killed. And there's evidence to support what they're saying.
And Hamas are the ones doing the killing, because for Hamas, they don't want anybody else to be handing out the food. For Hamas, they want control of the distribution of food. And for them, UNRWA, we have to remember, UNRWA is completely infiltrated, is completely run by Hamas members in the Gaza Strip. We know from the hostages that came back, the hostages that were released, said they were being held by Hamas by UNRWA employees, by UNRWA teachers, by other people there, and therefore UNRWA is a completely compromised organization. So we have to take everything that UNRWA says with a significant pinch of salt. But the reality is this: there are 950 truckloads at the beginning of the week of aid that were sitting on the Gaza side that the UN wasn't distributing. Now that we've brought this up and highlighted it, we're now seeing that that aid is beginning to be distributed.
Well, we put that claim to UN aid agency officials, and they're saying they have enormous difficulties coordinating with the Israeli authorities with regard to their humanitarian movements inside Gaza. Bureaucratic problems, logistical issues, other security problems imposed by the Israeli authorities, as well as the ongoing fighting on the ground, as well as, they pointed out, criminal looting on the ground. And Israel preventing them from using their own staff to pick up and distribute cargo. The conclusion from all that would have to be that food supplies are being weaponized by Israel in Gaza.
Absolutely not. Food supplies are being weaponized by Hamas. Food supplies are being weaponized by others. We are not weaponizing food supplies. We have gone over and we had to call a press conference to show everybody that there were these 950 trucks that we wanted distributed. And lo and behold, once we showed everybody that the trucks were there, all of a sudden the UN and other agencies were able to find a way to distribute this aid. And this week they managed to distribute 470 truckloads of aid. And we hope they will distribute the rest of it over the coming days. And we will allow more aid to come in. The problem isn't aid coming in. The problem is aid not being distributed. And that may be for many reasons, but it seems that when you shine a light on it, the United Nations are able to overcome all of these problems they said existed.
You talked about UNRWA being infiltrated by Hamas, but of course we saw earlier this week more than 100 aid agencies, Oxfam, Doctors Without Borders, so many others, signed a joint statement accusing Israel of deliberately using starvation as a weapon of war in Gaza. And of course you know that amounts to a war crime, don't you?
We totally reject that. We are not using hunger in any way. We want to bring all the food in necessary and distribute it to Gazans. It is not in our interest. We have got no interest in the Gazan population suffering or the Gazan population not having food. We want Gazans to have food. We want them to have access to food. And we have set up, we have allowed the GHF to be there. We have allowed the UN to distribute. And so it's simply not true. And you have to question the motivation of some of these agencies, because at the same time, if they called for the release of the hostages, we know that if the hostages were released tomorrow by Hamas, and Hamas laid down their arms, this would all be over.
Well, in fairness to them, it is in their statement. But you concede that Israel has a responsibility as an occupying power to ensure that there is no harm to civilians and to ensure that food can reach them in wartime, because that is international law.
Well, I would disagree that we're an occupying power, because we're in the middle of a war and we're fighting a war in that territory. We have no desire to hold on to that territory.
Well, that contradicts what some of the members of the cabinet are saying.
Well, certain people may say that, but that goes against government policy. It is not correct, it is inaccurate, and it has been condemned by the Prime Minister, and it is the Prime Minister that creates the policy, and the Prime Minister has been very, very clear about this. So the message is very, very clear. We want our Gazans to have access to food. We will do what we need in order to make sure we bring back our hostages and for Hamas to lay down their arms. And again, I need to stress this again. If Hamas released the hostages and Hamas laid down their arms, the war would be over, and Hamas and Gazans could live a free life. They could start rebuilding their territory, and they could start to rebuild their lives. It is Hamas that is causing this misery. It is Hamas that is the cause of this. It is the Hamas that started this on the 7th of October, and it is the Hamas that are continuing it. It is entirely in the hands of Hamas whether or not this ends. And we were very close to a ceasefire. And Hamas are the ones who've now decided they're not interested in a ceasefire. They don't want to, because they believe that world pressure will help them get what they want, which is to stay in control of Gaza, to keep the hostages in their control, and to build again for another attack on Israel. They believe the international community will pressure Israel to stop the war in order to allow Hamas to do what they want to do, and therefore they're not coming to the table and having serious negotiations.
Whatever the rights and wrongs of this, Ambassador, would you agree that the images we're seeing of children starving are just awful? And it's no longer just the children and their families, but the aid workers who are trying to help them survive, the local journalists who are covering the story, testimony from journalists who work for the BBC, Reuters, AFP, AP, about how terrible things are. And these are people that the world relies on to verify things on the ground, because Israel isn't allowing foreign journalists into Gaza.
As a person, as a father, as a human, of course, some of the images that we're seeing are terrible. And how could you not have sympathy, and how could you not feel your heart feel for those people there? We don't want that to happen. We want there to be enough food, but this is on Hamas. Hamas are the ones who are using hunger as a tool in order to get people to pressure Israel. They are the ones who are controlling food. They are the ones that are controlling aid. It's not a coincidence that in their negotiations over the ceasefire, one of the key elements they want is that all of the aid should be supplied by UNRWA, and none of it should be supplied by GHF, because they know that food and aid is being effectively supplied by the GHF. That's why they're killing people when they're trying to go there. It's why they're trying to stop Gazans from going there. And they know that the GHF and aid and food is a tool that they can use to control Gaza and control the population. Hamas aren't interested in the Gazan population. Hamas are not interested in the people there. They are happy to see them suffer. They are happy to see them die. They are happy to see them in hunger. Because for them, it's a political tool. For them, they are stealing the aid. They are using the aid. They are doing what they want with the aid. And therefore, this is on Hamas. And again, if Hamas release the hostages, if Hamas lay down their arms, this is over tomorrow.
So all the aid agencies and all the journalists who are in Gaza, the local journalists and the doctors who are there also warning of what they're calling a death spiral in the place, they're all making it up and they all support Hamas.
I didn't say that. What I said was that all of the people that are putting out this are not blaming Hamas. This is Hamas who are at fault here. We've just said there were 950 trucks on the border waiting to be distributed by the UN, and they didn't distribute any of it. And therefore, if they're not distributing that aid, the aid is not getting to the people. And therefore, we have to ask why. And we also have to say that at this point, it is in Hamas's interest. Hamas are the ones who are stopping the aid getting there. They are the ones stopping people going to the GHF to be able to get their food and to be able to get their supplies. And so whilst these international groups are definitely coming from a position of care and a position of worrying about the population, their blame is in the wrong place.
Michael, I want to thank you very much indeed for coming in. Michael Freeman is the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria. Good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.